2.5 Default route propagation. 2.5.1 Propagate a default static route in OSPF v2. Your network user will need to send packets out of your network to non-OSPF networks, such as the Internet. This is where you need to have a default static route that they can use. In this topology in the figure, R2 is connected to the Internet and should propagate a default route to R1 and R3. The router connected to the Internet is sometimes called the edge router or the gateway router. However, in OSPF terminology, the router located between OSPF routing domain and a non-OSPF network is called the Autonomous System Boundary Router, the ASBR. All that is required for R2 to reach the Internet is a default static route to the service provider. Note in this example, a loopback interface with IPv4 address 64.100.0.1 is used to simulate the connection to service provider. To propagate a default route, the edge router R2 must be configured with the following. A default static route using the IP route 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0 command. The default information originate router configuration command. This instructs R2 to be the source of the default route information and propagate the default static route in OSPF updates. In the following example, R2 is configured with the loopback to simulate a connection to the Internet. Then a default route is configured and propagated to all other OSPF routers in the routing domain. Here, R2 is configured to simulate a connection to the Internet. First, we create a loopback 1 and assign it the address 64.100.0.1/30. So this is the command. First, in the global config mode for R2, type interface LO1. And then in the interface config mode, you enter IP address 64.100.0.1, 255.255.255.252. And then we configure a default static route using the loopback 1 as the exit interface. In the global config mode for R2, enter IP route 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0, loopback 1. The message about possible performance impact appears because a loopback is not a point-to-point interface. In the lab, we are only using the loopback to simulate the ISP connection, so the warning can be expected. Finally, under OSPF process 10, in the global config mode for R2, you enter router OSPF 10. And in the router config mode, enter the default -information originate. This tells R2 to advertise the default route into OSPF. Now, R1 and R3 can learn. So the 0.0.0.0/0 can talk to R2 and then reach to the Internet. 2.5.2 Verify the propagated default route. Now we can verify the default route using the show IP route command. On R2, notice the gateway of last resort is 0.0.0.0 to network 0.0.0.0. The asterisk 0.0.0.0/0 is directly connected, loopback 1. The asterisk tells us two things. S means that's a static route. The asterisk means a candidate default route. So R2 has a default static route pointing towards the simulated Internet connection. We can also check the routing table on R1 and R3. Their default route will appear as O*E2 0.0.0.0/0. Let's break down the O asterisk E2. O means learn through OSPF. Asterisk, that is candidate default route. E2 is OSPF external type 2 route. The E2 appears because R2, the ASBR, is introducing a route from outside the OSPF domain into OSPF. Now let's look at R1's routing table to verify that it received the default route from R2. In R1, you enter show IP route pipe begin gateway. The first important line is the gateway of last resort is 10.1.1.6 to network 0.0.0.0. This means that if R1 does not have a specific route for a destination, it will forward a packet to 10.1.1.6, which is R2. We can see the actual default route O asterisk E2 0.0.0.0/0. In the bracket, it shows 110/1 via 10.1.1.6. Let's break this down. O, that means learn through OSPF. Asterisk means candidate default route. E2 is for OSPF external type 2. The 0.0.0.0/0 is the default route. 110, that means OSPF administrative distance. 1 is the OSPF metric. 10.1.1.6 is the next hop address, which is R2. Now let's verify the default route on R3. In R3, you enter show IP route pipe begin gateway. The first line shows the gateway of last resort is 10.1.1.9 to network 0.0.0.0. This means R3 send traffic for unknown destinations to 10.1.1.9, which is R2. The default route is O asterisk E2 0.0.0.0/0. In the bracket, it is 110/1 and via 10.1.1.9. Let's break that down. O is the learned through OSPF. Asterisk, that's candidate default route. E2, OSPF external type 2 route. 0.0.0.0/0, this is the default route. 110, this is the OSPF administrative distance. 1 is the OSPF metric. 10.1.1.9, that's the next hop. That's the R2. So R3 also successfully learned the default route from the ASBR, R2.